We have time for a couple of questions, if there are any burning questions out there. Oh, cool. There's just a mic on its way to you.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry, can I probe a bit more on the final question you asked, which
Yeah.
is where does each player sit? Because unlike Amazon and Netflix, healthcare is a collaboration between pharma, between payers,
Yeah.
regulators, and suppliers. And I guess what I'm trying to understand is how we can unlock those benefits for the patients, given that it needs to be a collaborative approach between all of those players in the market.
Yeah. So I think that
Where
the,
does it
sorry,
occur?
say again?
And do you have an idea of who can primarily deliver those benefits?
So I think the more people that are talking about it, so let's use a medtech example. So if medtech players decide that actually this is going to be really important to their future in this industry, in the ecosystem, and they've interrogated, sounds awful, enough patients data rather, to give them that insight they need, then I think it's almost like going to the other players, so be it a payer or be it, pharma that you might collaborate with or whatever it might be, and sort of giving them the evidence to show how this is going to be advantageous to them as well as to you, as well as to the user. Because I think that if you think about 10 years ago, in any situation you're in, nothing was quite so much about you as an individual. It was much more about the masses, if you like. But now people are used to, so everybody, no matter where you sit, sort of has it a little bit in their mind's eye that, well, we're used to having what we want and when we want it and how we want it. And I don't think it matters where you sit in the ecosystem. There's that personal experience, which is why I said, can you think about it with your two hats on? And I think that will influence decisions that are made, but I think you need to have the evidence, because ultimately what we all work for is for the good of the patient, the good of the consumer. That's the ethos, isn't it? And I think if you have that data, if you have that detail, then that insight, then you're much more likely to help persuade or cajole people to come along on the journey with you. That's my take on it. But I don't think there's an exact answer because it's future.
Sorry, Helen, just building on from that, and once we've been transformative and it's much more about tailored, it's personal, where do you think the biggest impact, will it be more precise medicines to treat illnesses, or will it be enabling people to stay healthier?
You would hope it could be both. Because if you think about, even from a personal perspective, so my husband bought me a Garmin for my birthday present, and even from that personal perspective, I'm using the data on that to tell me if I've had enough sleep, if I've done enough steps, if I've got my pulse oxygen levels to the right, whatever, So I think there's an element of the wellness piece, which is a lot more from the personalised perspective, but then the industry, the health ecosystem can use that. But if you go back to cell and gene therapy, the therapies that are coming out, the clinical results that are coming out are showing that so many of these therapies, their efficacy levels are so amazing, so that, like, my mum had a horrible, horrible cancer, and if there was a way that I could say to her, if it ever came back, okay, Mum, it's going to be 2 weeks of hell, it's not going to be 6 months of hell, because this is specifically for you, it's not for every woman in her 50s, whatever it might be, then that would be amazing. And I think then, I mean, I don't know, but then I think that the cost implications are almost better from a GDP perspective, because I know it's expensive, but it's tailored to that individual, and then the benefits of my mum living a healthier life for the next 10 years and putting back into society and paying her taxes and all that kind of stuff is only a good thing. Yeah. So I think there's two ways of looking at it.
Good. Any other questions? You let off now. Good behaviour.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Helen. That brings us to our final panel on the programme today. We've seen, I guess, over the last 18 months just how rapidly innovation can move in this sector, and it's been quite remarkable. But not just from this sector. When you saw the way that Mercedes got involved with UCL in ventilators, it was leading innovation coming in from the engineering sector, you know, from the cream of the crop who were doing Formula One. You know, it's kind of, we all learn across sectors as well as within our own, and often the most innovative things happen at the intersection, I guess. So I think in that sense, I'm really pleased with the closing panel that's been put together today to look at, you know, what drives innovation, but what do we learn from our own but other people's sectors. And it's great to have a diverse panel that has brought that insight into our sector when you look at the way they join companies in the life science space. And I guess as always with that, then you need someone who's going to moderate it, who kind of just asks those difficult questions sometimes and really gets to the nub of what do we want to learn. And to do that, you kind of need someone who's got years of experience, organised, really thinks it through, and some sort of rock star status to take the panel with them. So I'm delighted now to welcome Mike Ward to the stage, who for our sector probably has got to almost rock star status. But Mike, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Tony. Should have come up with some loud music or something. I just wonder if I've got my plectrums. No, sorry. Am I correct in thinking that you're not going to come back up at the end? Okay, I just wondered whether I've got an hour. I'm finishing at 5, not 10 to 5. Okay, that's good. All right. So in fact, if I could ask my panelists to come up, that would be great. Just sit where you feel comfortable. So as you can probably tell, so Tony and I probably tonight we'll be thinking about stuff that we could do next year, and it's normally sort of inspired by things that we've heard during the day. And I can't remember when we sort of came up with this idea, but it was partly also who's heard of Max Martin's? Anybody heard of Max Martin's? Yeah, that's the point. However, what's really interesting is that you will have heard of stuff that he's written, like Baby One More Time, I Kissed a Girl, That's the Way I Want It. So he is, in fact, with a team of writers from different musical genres, is the second most successful writer of hit songs across the world, right? Just only Lennon and McCartney beat him, right? But you've never heard of him. And actually what was interesting is that he was successful in the 90s, then it all dried up. So what he did is he stopped, he kind of gave up for a little while, then went to New York, and then sort of, got involved with different musical genres, and then started all over again. So he now writes for Ed Sheeran, Taylor Swift, Katy Perry, etc., etc. So what we kind of sort of realised is that, well, there's some value in, working in teams and actually also bringing different ideas. And in fact, Brian Utzi, who's a professor at the Kellogg School of Management, actually has got some science behind this. So what he did was him and his team, they went to the website, which is a Clarivate product, so shameless plug. But it's a fantastic repository of all the sort of scientific papers that have been written. And what they do is they actually looked at all the papers and how many citations they had, and they coded for how many authors there were on that paper. And not surprisingly, what they found was the most impactful, most important papers actually had multiple authors, and often people coming in from different disciplines. And similarly, they found it when they looked at the patents. Again, the most cited patents were those that were coming out. So that was the reason why we just sort of thought, well, okay, is there some value in us sort of looking and sort of seeing, okay, within this industry, what are the opportunities of looking outside? So we brought together an interesting panel, and when you sort of hear their backgrounds, etc., you sort of think, oh, this is interesting. It's going to see where this is going to go. So as a starter, I thought what we'd do is I'd get each of you to introduce yourselves. So we'll start here with Kirsty, and we'll introduce yourself, the company, but also as an icebreaker, it would be really good to understand what you wanted to be when you were growing up, when you were just about to choose your O-levels or GCSEs. Yeah? So...
Great. Keep that off. Hi. So, hello, I'm Kirsty Spake. I lead our data and advanced analytics team at Abcam. So at Abcam, we're dedicated to the life science industry, and we co-create precision tools and reagents that we deliver to life scientists all around the world. So I work in our digital team, and at Abcam, we believe that the combination of the scientific expertise together with the digital expertise can lead to great innovation and breakthroughs. So what did I want to be? So first of all, my accent is South African, in case some of you are wondering. So I didn't do GCSEs or O-levels, so a bit confusing. But I think around 15 we made a subject choice. The subject choice that I made was a combination of languages and mathematics and sciences. And what I wanted to be was completely unrelated to that. I wanted to be a top-class show jumper. But at the time, it was becoming obvious to me that that probably wasn't going to happen, that I didn't necessarily have the skill set. So my second love was English. And I really had visions of being probably in the publishing world, or a writer, or a journalist. So I do wonder if I still have a book in me, or if I have any book in me. But I'll probably have to maybe get some tips from one of my fellow panel members on that. But yeah, so that was... Yeah. That's me and what I wanted to be.
Kirsty, everybody's got one book in there. Unfortunately, there are some people who have success with that, and then everything else they've written. Irving Welsh is a good example. One good book, the rest terrible. So
I can get one good one there. Yeah.
Cara.
Hi everyone, I'm Cara Croft. So I'm an academic, so I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone here. But I'm based at the UK Dementia Research Institute at University College London. So the UK DRI was established about 5 years ago now, and that's kind of a centre without walls. So we're 7 centres across research institutions across the UK. What's interesting about the UK Dementia Research Institute is that there's around 650 researchers, but about 40% of those are actually not from a dementia research background. So they've kind of brought in, so we do have a very diverse environment in terms of kind of backgrounds from maths, physics, things like that. But I'm also here in my capacity as a Race Against Dementia fellow. So Race Against Dementia was a charity funded by Sir Jackie Stewart after the unfortunate diagnosis of his wife with frontotemporal dementia. And the idea was that he's kind of continuing to get investment and money for this charity, and they fund 5-year fellowships for people that are 3 years out of their PhDs. So quite early career research when I kind of jumped into this 5 years of substantial funding. But what's been really nice about that is that obviously with his ties to Formula One, we are also connected with Formula One partners. So we're kind of learning some things from Formula One and kind of bringing that into our dementia research and kind of career ideas, so that's really nice. And for the what I wanted to be when I'm growing up, I still feel like I'm growing up, but I think when decided on my GCSEs, I just wanted to be a doctor. I really didn't understand kind of the other career options out there, so I was shadowing in a hospital, and I saw quite a few people with dementia, and I figured kind of pushing in as a scientist might actually be more beneficial. So I'm still hoping that kind of in my career that we'll come up with treatments for people with dementia.
Hi everyone, I'm Andrew Watson. I'm VP of AI and R&D at Helix. So we're an AI-powered, patient-inspired biotech startup based in Cambridge with a focus on rare diseases. In terms of my journey into this, I've been in life sciences since April. Dementia was actually one of the reasons why I moved over. I previously worked for Dyson, before that Symantec in the US, and originally GCHQ, so kind of tech focus all the way. But my aunt passed away a few years ago with dementia, and it was really fascinating from an engineering perspective watching her decline. I know that sounds difficult for a lot of people to understand, but I think this room will probably understand what I mean. And so how some of her just kind of switched off was fascinating to me with that perspective. and I wanted to do something more useful, frankly. So with a background in AI and ML, I understood that AI would be quite useful for drug discovery. It's obviously not, I wasn't the first person to think of that, but it was a growing field and I thought I'd get involved. So to make myself more credible, I thought I'd go and do a PhD in pharmacy and pharmacology, which I've almost finished. We're kind of well on the way. And then moved across to Helix. So the plan was to graduate and move into this world, but it was just too good an opportunity to miss, so I'm here. In terms of what I wanted to be when I was growing up, it was between architecture, being a doctor, or software engineer. And I kind of have been desperately trying to get back towards being a doctor. I felt like I'd missed out a little bit there, so well on the way. And I kind of ticked the drawing box at Dyson, so I think I've kind of done it all now from where I want to be. Still not sure about whether I'm grown up yet. I don't know what point that happens, but yeah, we'll see. So good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, great, thanks. Nigel.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Nigel Whittle, and I'm head of the medical and healthcare group at Plextek. So Plextek is an electronic engineering consultancy. And because I feel very much on the sort of tail end of my career, and hopefully nobody from my company is here at the moment, I'm planning to retire in April, and they don't know yet. So I'll tell you a little bit more about my early career, which is slightly more interesting, and perhaps a bit more relevant to this topic. So I started off doing a biochemistry degree many years ago in Oxford. I went on to do a PhD. And as part of that, we collaborated with Genentech, developing what turned out to be the Herceptin drug. And that really sort of gave me a taste for commercialization, for application of the science, and trying to drive those medicines into real clinical use. So I went off to join a biotechnology company, Celtech, many years ago, which is the UK's first or second biotech company. Worked with them for a few years, then went to join another biotech company, Cantab Pharmaceuticals in Cambridge. And that sort of went through the fairly sort of standard trajectory of even successful biotech companies doing very well at the start, really good research, really good development, getting products into clinical trials, and then things going horribly wrong. So in that process, I sort of gradually moved. I'd moved from working on oncogenes to working on antibody engineering, and I moved into project management. And as the company went up for sale, I moved into business development. And as the company collapsed, I took a redundancy payment. I went off to do an MBA at the Judge Institute, having got this taste for commercialization. And then since then, I've sort of moved in a kind of more commercial environment, working in a number of consultancies in Cambridge, and working for UKTI, the UK government international business arm, and then finally sort of moved into sort of consultancies with companies like Syngenta and finally Plextek. So that's my trajectory. I'm sort of saying all that to give the indication that I've worked in lots of different sectors all the time, and I've never really had the desire to sort of work in one particular area, in one particular field for a long period of time. And then, so finally, to answer your question, which I'm going to sort of slightly dodge, actually, and I have this memory, which may actually be a false memory, because I've never managed to check this. But I remember when I was about to do my A-levels, I think, there was, and I was quite interested in biology, and I was quite interested in physics, and there was a special issue of Scientific American, which I remember clearly, but I can't find it again, which featured the two sunrise technologies, so one of which is biotechnology, and one of which they called at the time microchip technology. And for various reasons, I elected for biotechnology. And I remember the story because every year I sort of think, well, you know, biotech is not really getting anywhere. And the microchip technology, IT technology, has sort of transformed the world. And I think it's quite an interesting story because, as I say, now it's sort of the sunset of my career. I'm starting to think those two areas now being coalesce and coming back together again. So perhaps I may have sort of got the wrong one first of all, but I may just have a chance to jump into the right sector. Anyway, so thank you.
Hello, my name's Mark Doyle, and when I was growing up, I wanted to be an actor, and that's what I became. A professional actor, working in theatre and film. I set up a theatre company with a colleague and a film production company. And then around 15 years ago, myself and John, who set up those things with, thought it'd be really nice to eat occasionally and own something. So joyful though this theatre world is, perhaps we should diversify our expertise. And we set up a company called The Method, which creates immersive learning experiences. And one of the immersive learning experiences that we've created is called A Life in a Day, which is where we've used our creative expertise to create a program which allows anyone working in healthcare the opportunity to walk in the shoes of a patient for up to 24 hours. The idea is you don't change your schedule, you go to work as normal, go to home as go about your business at home as normal, but for those 24 hours you have a condition or a disease. With the intention of, thanks to Helen for setting this up, putting the human at the centre of what you do and trying to encourage people to think in their roles how they can be more patient-centric in thought and behaviour.
Great, thanks very much, Mark, and we'll delve into that a bit further. I've actually participated in one of those programs, so it was very interesting. And just for full disclosure, so when I was sort of that age, originally I wanted to be a poet. Right? I wanted to be Shelley, you know? But like Nigel, I saw a Horizon program where they were showing these guys in California who were doing sort of genetic engineering, and that this was going to be the future of medicine. And I thought that's what I want to do, and I therefore switched from doing English literature, French, and history to doing maths, physics, chemistry, to then go and do biochemistry. So, and then I realised I didn't want to be in a white coat, so I became a journalist. So I got back to being almost a quasi-poet. So anyway, I think that you can sort of see that we've got an interesting array of talents and interests, and it's the next 45 minutes we're going to sort of explore sort of learnings that they're being able to bring in and shape actually some of the things that they're doing now. If you've got any questions, okay, again, just where's Aline with the roving mic? Oh, right. You got the roving mic? Yes. Yeah, great. So if you've got a question, wave madly, because although I'm wearing the glasses, they don't work that well. Yeah, so sort of getting old. Wave madly, and then we'll get the microphone to you. So Kirsty, I'm going to pick on you first. Thank you. So earlier in your career, you were in the consumer and retail business, and from that you then moved to big pharma. You went to GSK, but you could still associate with consumer health. So could you sort of explain what the sort of the challenges were for that transition, and what you learned in your earlier career that actually helped shape what you were doing with a GSK in the first instance, before we get to Abcam. Yeah? Great,
thank you. So actually I was just reflecting that if I would be talking to 15-year-old Kirsty now, she'd probably be quite surprised, intrigued, and a little bit confused as to how I'm doing what I'm doing right now in terms of those original subjects and desires. So I started my career in market research. So I worked for a market research company in South Africa. And in that role, I did both qualitative and quantitative research. And my clients were predominantly consumer goods companies, retailers, car companies, the whole range, and also some NGOs, so including doing research for organizations that were trying to bring about behavior change during the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and also organizations supporting the transition to South Africa becoming a democracy, because I started work during that period. And I think what market research sort of gave me, or gives, is it's got tools and established techniques to help companies understand and be ready for the future. So actually understanding the present and the recent past and what's really important to your consumers or customers is really helpful in many cases in terms of trying to peer into the future a bit. And understand where things might be going. I then moved to consumer goods companies, as you said, and retailers. And probably what I learned there is that insights as a function and market research is very established within these organizations. And so they actually embed insights and consumer analytics into all of their innovation processes, which is great. I then moved to GSK, and I moved into consumer health. And probably what I sort of took there was that kind of sort of understanding of how to understand consumers and what's important to them. And beyond just the product, but also their attitudes, their fears, their needs, and what they're looking for. And what was different at GSK in terms of maybe to what I've been doing previously was also then adding in the element of the experts. So actually the sports nutritionists, the dentists, actually at another company I work with vets, so actually understanding the needs of those experts as they work together with patients. And so actually understanding the needs of multiple stakeholders, the end patient or consumer, the expert who's trying to help that end patient and consumer, and also the retailers, because a lot of those products will go through retail organizations, and how do you deliver the product to them. In terms of what I learned through that process, I think I'm really inspired with working with all these different experts, and the changes that they're making to the world is just amazing. Probably what I brought to it was actually helping experts see beyond just the health condition of a person, but actually the person as a whole, but also helping organizations see the experts as people as well, and not just experts. So even experts are people, and they have their own attitudes and needs and ways that we can help them do their job better as well. So that's probably what I brought to and what I learned.
Right. So, Cara, I'm going to sort of come to you next. So, you're a neuroscientist, and of all the sort of scientific disciplines, that one, in fact, is the one that actually can bring in a whole diversity of skills. I mean, you're at King's, the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience. Is that the right, or is it the other way around? IOPPBN, whatever it is, yeah. And there you've got psychiatrists, you've got psychologists, and you've got neuroscientists. And then you've also got, sort of mental health practitioners, etc., are involved in this. So there's already an amount of diversity, and also it's an area where, in fact, it's beset by a lot of scientific unknowns. So, how does, because you're an academic, how does the field actually manage that diversity, and how does it benefit from it?
So I think in general with neuroscience, I think the way to break that down is the fact that the brain is so complex, and that you need people from kind of every single background working on that. So like I've already mentioned that we have the mathematicians, we have the physicists, because when it comes to the brain in health, we're still kind of unclear as to what's going on, as well as in disease. So it's kind of harnessing all those minds and realizing that it's a big problem, but also kind of with the idea of big is that kind of requires funding and a mindset to kind of tackle that as a big problem. But with that comes in all the big data, so you need the people to kind of work with the big data. So that's the first bit. But then I think the next aspect is team. So you do need a team to push into this area of kind of the unknown. So you need to focus on the strengths of the team and kind of all these different backgrounds and what kind of ideas they can be bringing to the table. And I think that's still hard in academia, because we still have that idea of the lone academic who just sits and thinks, but kind of what they're trying to do at the UK Dementia Research Institute and what I've had exposure to with Race Against Dementia is kind of bringing in different people and ideas and kind of perspectives of how to think about this problem. So definitely in academia, there needs to be a change to kind of reward the team, because still it's kind of first author, last author, whereas in industry and biotech, you can kind of push with that team idea. And then lastly, I think the best thing, or the thing that kind of could be harnessed more, is kind of the idea of open neuroscience. So just particularly from negative clinical trials or negative projects, sharing that so you don't kind of retrace the steps that have been done before. But we have seen in neuroscience is kind of the sharing of, so the mouse brain atlas, which was initially set off to just kind of look at gene expression. We now start understanding the circuitry. We know that for mice, we know some of that for humans. And that was all achieved with open science and team science and kind of thinking about this as a big idea and a big problem. So I think those are probably the things that kind of you need to focus on to bring value and to keep pushing in the right direction.
And how easy is it to get them to all understand the same language? Because they've got different vocabulary. They've almost got different dialects. So how to ensure that team is operating, how do you actually get them to communicate?
So I think I've been learning that a lot. So as part of my fellowship, I've been working with some people at Mercedes and kind of discussing one of the imaging problems. And I think first, obviously, I'm a basic scientist by training, so everything I've studied is biological mechanisms, but kind of first is just kind of articulating the problems in the best way possible. And kind of if you come with an open mind of just, these are the problems, you might have the solutions, then I think that's what's been working well for everyone so far. Just kind of an openness, and as well just kind of having that psychological safety that no one, like what you're saying isn't going to be rejected. And I mean, you will get some questions that kind of strike you out of nowhere, but then that helps with kind of working together as well.
Right. Andrew, I mean, it was interesting in your intro, where you sort of talked about so that transition and about sort of dementia, because what Cara was sort of saying, there is that kind of that link between the way that sort of like the computer networks and sort of neural networks, maybe that's a bit simplistic, but you can sort of see how sort of with cognitive science or whatever, that there are sort of links with AI, etc. So I was just wondering, at what point did you sort of transition from being a software guy to becoming a tech-savvy life sciences guy? What were the challenges of actually making that, apart from the sort of this road to Damascus experience of I want to be a doctor after all?
Yeah, so actually it was working alongside Dr. Claire Durrant, who is a Race Against Dementia fellow that Dyson sponsored. And so it was being able to work alongside her on some imaging problems, thinking about how we can use some of the techniques that Dyson developed in terms of battery analysis, what chemical reactions are happening there that could be akin to what's going on in the brain. Can we try and use some of the same imaging techniques, which I'm assuming is what you're working on, similar kind of ideas. And I just thought, this is so cool. Like it was fascinating working for Dyson, designing products, and I think everybody kind of respects the way that they've gone about their business in many ways. But it wasn't hugely fulfilling, to be honest. I mean, making hair straighteners for people is cool, but if you can help put someone's life back together again, then that's got to be way more useful. I think the thing for me was realizing that actually when you have someone that's suffering with a disease, it's not just that individual, it's the whole support group around them, and then the support group of the support group. And so in my case, it was my aunt was unwell, and so my uncle was looking after her, so my mum was looking after my uncle, and then it just kind of, this ripple occurs outwards. So if you can get right into the middle of that and start to help, that's when you really start to change people's lives. And I just thought, let's not mess about, let's get on with it, really. And so in terms of am I fully in life sciences, I'd like to say I am. I kind of a crushing imposter syndrome throughout my career. Hence I better go and do a PhD so they believe me when I go and start working for Helix. Well, start working for anyone, in fact. In terms of what the challenges are, I mean, from the outside, this feels like an impenetrable world. The people move throughout the rest of kind of the tech world pretty openly. So you'll work at Google for a bit, you'll go and work at Facebook, you can take some of those skills to work for Twitter, whatever it is that you want to do. But life sciences is a bubble, and if you go to a dinner, everybody's talking about, oh, what's so-and-so up to? Is that chap still running that site? Who's head of lab there? Everybody knows everyone, particularly in Cambridge. And so breaking into that, now I'm here, actually feels nice. Everybody's very generous with their time, with their knowledge. one of the things I noticed actually in the outside world is that because the objective is often financial reward or being first to market with a product, people will hold back some of their knowledge. So if you're the person that's an expert on motors, you'll want to remain the expert on motors or the expert on batteries or the person that can do thermosetting plastics. But in life sciences, at least my experience in Helix and everyone I've worked with so far, is that everybody wants to share what they know with you because they recognize, like Cara was talking about, that it's about trying to solve those bigger problems that no one knows the answer to. And that was really the final thing for me, was trying to solve problems that no one else knows how to. I find hugely compelling. Trying to work out how everything works. What's really going on when someone has dementia? What pathways have changed? What's being overexpressed, underexpressed? Like, we're getting there, but there's a lot more to do.
But, AI is one of those technologies that, we all know is, it's already around us, how when we buy stuff off Amazon, etc., all of a sudden it then, wants to sell you another lawnmower,
Yeah.
Why do you need a second lawnmower when you've already got one? But, so it's not that smart. But one can imagine eventually it's going to get there, and therefore one can sort of at least conceptualize, right, that artificial intelligence is going to. But I'm just sort of, thinking, when you are sort of trying to work that out and you are trying to converse with biologists, what are the sort of what are the insights, or what are the things that you're doing that makes them look at challenges differently?
Yeah, so bluntly asking lots of stupid questions. I think that if you spent your entire career in this field, there is a way of doing things, and people will continue to perpetuate that. If you come into this world unafraid to ask some difficult questions, even if they are actually stupid, it might cause a conversation that leads someone to say, well, I don't know, actually, we've just always done it that way. And so in terms of AI, I think that it's a bit of a buzzword. It is everywhere. And what I find super interesting is rather than making an algorithm run slightly faster, it's finding a whole new way of applying that technique. That's the exciting thing for me. And so just to pick up on the Amazon example, I think they talk a lot about customer obsession. That's what they're all about, right? They want to understand what you're going to do next, what you're going to buy, putting you another lawnmower in your basket because you clearly have an obsession with lawnmowers, but each to their own. And I think if we were going to talk about this in terms of patients, then the patient obsession, that's where we want to get to. That's the N of 1 for precision medicine, and that I think can only be achieved using AI. One interesting application is kind of making sense of the plethora of papers that get published on a daily basis. That if you were to start reading now, you'd never finish, and you would have forgotten by next Thursday what you read today. Machines make all of that tractable, and then you just sprinkle a bit of human magic on top. It's about presenting the right information to the pharmacologists and the medicinal chemists so you can maximize the impact they can have, because there's not many of them, right? There's a lot of patients, but there's not many experts at the center of it, and that's, I think, where AI can really supercharge them. Yeah,
and actually, the sort of, what you described there, I think it's almost like a sort of an engineering thing, because my father was an engineer, and his view was always, if it's hard, it means you're doing it wrong, because there will be an answer, and therefore, and there is that sort of sense of looking to sort of work it out, and it sort of seems like it's a sort of different approach. So Nigel, your background is really interesting, because you started off as a
proper scientist. Yeah.
White coat.
Yeah.
You actually finished your PhD, right? And then got into the sort of the hard grind of the biotech world, but then sort of transitioned out and have sort of seen how it works in other places. So what have you sort of seen as sort of best practice that you think actually, or you as a consultant have actually been encouraging life science companies to embrace?
So what I can do is to answer is tell you a bit about how it sort of tends to work at my current company, PlexTech. So we're based in Cambridge, and Cambridge is full of smart scientists, smart ideas, really clever people. And I was going to sort of preface my remark by sort of saying, probably not very profound statement, that I kind of really believe that innovation comes about at the interface of different disciplines, at the interface of different sectors. So we get a very sort of common issue of clever, smart life scientists from Cambridge University with a great idea coming to PlexTech saying, I've developed this really good chemical test, I've made this good antibody system, I've got some really sort of clever ideas, it might be a COVID test or something like that. And what I want to do is to turn that into a device with a sample that goes in one end and a button on the side of it and a big flashing red light on the side of it. And it's quite interesting how that sort of process goes on. And initially I'd be sort of, I'd bring an engineer into the first sort of meeting, and I was always sort of slightly disappointed, I suppose, by the pure pragmatism of the engineers. And that's something I've sort of realised working at PlexTech. Engineers are very pragmatic and quite conservative. But the real sort of breakthrough for me, I suppose, was, again, the rather obvious realisation that there are different kinds of engineers there. And any one engineer, a software engineer, might be quite sort of pragmatic and sensible about the way he does things. You bring in different engineers from different disciplines. So you've got hardware, software, firmware, you've got prototype designers, demo developers, manufacturers, whatever else. Bring those guys together into a room, and all of a sudden the ideas start sparking about, and that's where the really sort of smart, clever, innovative ideas come. So first of all, you have to sort of transition going from kind of the life science idea, the diagnostic test, to the device, and how can you make that device clever and smart? And it's really that sort of kind of combination of different disciplines. I also really find that the guys I enjoy working with most at my company are the ones who come along with quite broad backgrounds as well. So they might be biomedical engineers who know a bit about software, know a bit about hardware and firmware. And they can bring the kind of influence from those different disciplines along. So it's that sort of melding of different backgrounds that I think is the really sort of smart thing that kind of gives the really kind of the clever areas of innovation, either on a kind of macro scale or even in just the very sort of simple design of bits of kit. Things like sort of input on design and voice of customer experience is incredibly important in actually developing a device, a medical device or commercial device that's actually going to be useful and going to be used. And even understanding the commercial aspects as well kind of come into it. So it's all those sort of different disciplines that come into play, and that's what really sort of kind of drives the level of innovation, I find.
Yeah, great. So Mark, you mentioned it in your intro, the immersive experience of life in a day. It'd be really sort of helpful, I think, if you could just sort of, give sort of the pitch, particularly how it sort of equates to the sort of the pharma, the med tech space, what it looks like, and then maybe give us sort of how it's gone down with people.
Okay. So is that because if Andrew's got crushing imposter syndrome with his PhD, what on earth must I be feeling like? So if I was pitching, I wouldn't start with I wanted to be an actor when I was younger. That would not be my starting point. I've learnt that. I mean, I guess the pitch starts with, would it be beneficial for you to understand more about your patients? And it's pretty unusual that people say no at that point. And so if that's the case, then we sort of say, well, how are you currently finding out about patients? And that tends to be reading about them, talking to them, looking at data. And all of those things are obviously absolutely vital. But the experience of being a patient is different, I think, to finding out about, but than reading it. When it's happening to you, that's different to the data when you're reading about it or even listening to somebody go through it. So what we've tried to create is an experience that gives you that dimension and says, well, okay, what does the data mean when it's happening to you at 2 a.m.? What does the data mean when it's happening to you in front of your kids at 5 o'clock in the afternoon? So how the experience works is, we've got an interactive app, so from the moment you wake up on the day that you're taking part in our programs, the app starts to send you interactive challenges that require you to act and behave like a patient. And then on top of that, we send out a kit to you, which you then use, and it includes some medical devices that you might interact with, but it also includes wearables that give sort of sensations that a patient might be feeling. We have smells, we have liquids and blood and things to try and give you a visceral impact of what the patient might be feeling. And then on top of that, we have role play. So you get phone calls throughout the day from actors who take on the role of people that you might interact with if you're a patient. So a call from a healthcare professional, maybe a call from a patient support group, maybe a call from your boss who's going to ask you to do something that might be detrimental to your health but positive to your career, and place you in the dilemma and in the shoes of the patient for that period of time. And what we find is, if you live even for 24 hours in the shoes of a patient, it can enormously alter your perception of what that patient is really going through, and perhaps allow you to broaden the question, well, what more can I do in my role to be patient-centric? And I guess our goal is in line with yours, like patient centricity is the goal. I think I want people to be patient obsessed as well, and our tool is absolutely designed to encourage that.
Yeah, so I've got a bit of the kit actually.
There you go, yeah.
From the, I
Yes.
just found it in my.
You can take it off now. It is only meant to be 24 hours.
It did say that in the instruction
Oh,
manual.
sorry.
So anyway, but it was actually it was a really interesting experience, and you know, one of the conclusions was, wow, I'm glad I don't have chronic kidney disease.
Yeah.
Right. That was the first thing, because it was a bit of a pain, you know, sort of you're having to go through all the interactions. So it's interesting. When you've done that though when you pitched it to hard-nosed pharma guys, how does it go down initially, and is there a transition?
So the challenge, I think, with patient centricity or patient obsession is, how do you measure it? So the challenge we get is, you get people going, I really want to do this, but I kind of need an ROI, because the business still needs to show the measurable thing. So that's quite difficult. We're working really hard to demonstrate the measures, and it obviously depends who goes through the program to be able to show what the measures is. But because everybody's also data obsessed, we need to show something that aligns to that and to do the measures. So what we're building is ways of different showing the measures depending on the type of people that are going through it. So, for example, we know that people who've gone through it who are developing clinical trials have re-looked at those clinical trials as a result. We know that people who are writing patient materials have re-looked at those patient materials as a result of walking in their shoes. We know that people who are trying to communicate and sell their products to healthcare professionals are changing their conversations as a result of going through it. And what we also know is that people have become highly motivated to support and help patients in their role. So what we're looking at is making sure that we can show those measures and those metrics in a way that the organisations we work for go, yeah, well, we really want that.
So who would have known that improv could be the answer to all our problems?
Improv is not the answer to all of our problems. Sometimes you need a script as well.
Yeah, sure.
It's one of the things, obviously I'm new to this as well, but at Helix, they're obsessed with patients. And so there's an awful lot of people who are members of patient groups, have children and family that are affected with the disease. And so we get them in at our all-hands meetings. So at least once a month, we'll get someone who represents the patients, understands what it's like to be a patient or a parent of a rare disease patient, and really get some insight into their world. So it goes beyond just the disease biology, and you start to understand what it's like through the night, right? It's not just an easy thing to live with.
Yeah, in fact, I think in an earlier, on Helix, we had Nick Siro? Yeah, sort of.
He was involved at the beginning.
He's involved with Helix.
Yeah.
So, Kirsty, let's come back. So you're at GSK, and then which is a big company, okay? I mean, it's obviously going through transitions in the consumer health space. But you've gone to Abcam, which is a different kind of company. It's obviously smaller. So what that transition, and what were you able to bring from your previous experiences to into Abcam? I mean, essentially, when they were interviewing you, why did they hire you?
Now that's a different question. So I won't try and answer that last question in terms of the specifics, putting words in people's mouths. But I think in terms of why did I move to Abcam was I think it was really a really exciting space for me in terms of life sciences, and the fact that, as I said, in consumer goods companies and consumer healthcare, the approach of insights is very established, and consumer analytics and data analytics. And obviously from a scientific perspective, there's huge amounts of data analytics and analytics within life science companies. But actually the consumer insights as a function or a discipline was less established. And so actually Abcam was interested in bringing that approach and thinking into Abcam, which I found really exciting actually in terms of another industry, looking to consumer goods and consumer healthcare and thinking about actually could that help us with our thinking and our innovation. So in terms of coming into Abcam, I think when I did join, a number of the scientists did think, gosh, why has she been hired actually? So, I think it was a fair question on their side. But what I love about Abcam and life scientists, as you said, a very, very, very generous group of people, and actually very open to new ways of doing things, and how can we do things differently so that we can do things better and faster. So yeah, people were very open to that approach of insights and analytics. In terms of being a smaller company, it probably is easier to be closer to customers when you're in a smaller company. There's fewer layers. But actually, in some ways it was harder actually, because Abcam's customers are so individually deep experts in all sorts of different things. So to actually try and kind of understand and work across all those deep experts was can be difficult. And so actually one of the things that we do actually, I think is, I think we've all been talking about the fact that bringing different perspectives is hugely important, and looking at things through different lenses and from different approaches. So we do a lot of interviews with our customers to understand what they need, what they want, but we'll often do that with a life scientist and a non-scientist. We'll do the interviews together. And it's really interesting what each of us hears, and it's often very different things that we each hear, which is super interesting for me. Probably a different another issue with Abcam though is that we're fast growing. So actually, sort of how do we scale things quickly and how do we grow quickly is also new and different in terms of moving from a larger, bigger organisation to kind of think about. But actually then, interestingly now, because I've now moved more from that insight side into data and advanced analytics, because actually the solution to the majority of the issues and needs of our customers are going to be driven by data. And the solution is going to be driven by data, or that's a large component of how we're going to help our customers in the future. Lots of products, the way we think about it right now is, lots of products are physical products, but products in future will be data products in healthcare as well.
So this morning I asked a question of the first full panel, asking what was going to be the most important currency. I was hoping they were going to give the answer data, but nobody did. So, okay, but you've done that now, so we've gone full circle, which is good. So, Cara, Mercedes, very exciting, right? So you've got the sort of the Mercedes, the Formula One guys. What is it? What sort of insights? What their approach? What is it that they do that is adding value to the efforts that you and your colleagues are pursuing?
So for sure, the main thing is just straight away I can see that kind of for the aspect of my project, it's just going to go so much faster because a lot of the analysis that we're doing now is quite manual. But I've kind of said, well, I don't know how to do this. I've kind of worked with some biomedical engineers before and they weren't sure how they could do it. But one of the nice things is it's the machine learning team at Mercedes, and they spend most of their time kind of tracking videos of the other drivers to try and get insights into kind of what the other drivers are doing, what the other cars are doing. Because obviously their own drivers wear sensors, so they know every bit of data about their own drivers, but they're trying to kind of tap into what the other drivers are doing and what the other teams are doing. But they're now applying some of that technology where they're tracking the drivers to kind of track in our long-term cell imaging over time. And it's quite nice to see that kind of just they've been able to apply that really quite easily to the imaging data that we've kind of just given them lots of and said, can you do anything with this? So that's been really cool to see, and also just nice that they're applying kind of what they do in real Formula One races to kind of my biological data that I'm getting off the microscope.
Yeah, yeah. Although it isn't just the trick, just employ Lewis Hamilton. But, so Andrew, I'm just looking at sort of pinned down. So life sciences companies, if you were to go, because at the moment Helix is a kind of a cyborg of a company really. It's half life science, half tech. If you were to go to a fully blown sort of antibody technology company, one of those bi-specific companies that are hanging around Cambridge, what do you think sort of the insights of your software background could help those guys? What do you think you're bringing that would be unique that actually might accelerate their innovative efforts?
I think firstly there's an awful lot that goes on in any company that isn't unique. And I think life sciences maybe again enshrines itself slightly too much in that respect. So there's always budgets, there's always recruitment, there's always kind of team retention, development and those things. And the one thing that I've found moving into this world is focusing on the USP. So really trying to understand what it is that you're there for is super crucial. That was something that we used to do a lot when I was at Dyson, so understand the persona, who's the person that's going to buy this product. And I think you mentioned, you kind of alluded to just how many of these startups there are in Cambridge. They all have a fair amount of overlap. And I think that's one of the things that is worth drawing out, that what is your one thing that you do well? So getting into that would be important. From a software perspective, I think it's really about understanding how you can enable that focus. So what is it that the software, what is it that the platform can do for you so you can focus on your important outcome? What's the USP? And so for Helix, you mentioned it being a bit of a cyborg. We've got a lot of techies, a lot of bioinformaticians, a lot of cheminformaticians, but almost an equal number of ML and AI and data science folks. And so by pairing them together on projects, that's when we're really accelerating things, because you don't then have a cheminformatician, much as I love them, trying to write code and trying to learn various MR routines because they found it on the internet. So you have to have the people that have the deep tech background, back them up with the people that have the deep scientific and disease biology background, and then let them get on with it, much as Nigel was saying earlier. That's when the magic really happens.
Right.
Yeah. I would encourage them to embrace that in a kind of a one-sentence answer to your question, rather than think it's a little thing that they need to teach themselves.
Yeah. So before I come to you, Nigel, so we've got about sort of 8 minutes left. So are there any questions from the audience? So we've got one for Alan. So if you can wait until I've asked Nigel a question and then I'll come straight to you, Alan. And if anybody else wants to ask a question as well, if you can sort of queue up, that would be great. And Aline will give you a microphone. So, so Nigel, you mentioned just a little bit earlier on about how you got in the room these sort of different breeds of engineer, and how they all sparked ideas off each other. So it's sort of kind of almost like the same question that I asked, and I'm just trying to sort of think, is there something, the chemistry or the mechanics of what was going on in that room, do you see that in life sciences companies? And is there something that life science executives could do to kind of mimic or actually embrace that approach?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I suspect I don't really have very much insight in this area at all, but you very sort of luckily asked one question where I sort of feel I have a sort of interesting sort of story or observation. And this, I guess, sort of stems back to the time I was working for a private equity fund, and we're building startup companies. So I was working down in King's College to build startup biotech companies. and we had one or two notable successes. And the model of the fund, as we're building these companies, was very much to try and bring different expertises together. But actually, quite specifically, we realized that there's sort of 3 different worlds in the biotech sector, in the biotech world. So you have the world of sort of really good science, and there are lots of very good academic professors out there who do some fantastic scientists and postdocs and whatever else. You have the commercial world, the world of business development, doing great deals, building companies, expanding the technologies. And you have the world of finance as well, and this is kind of a critical aspect about where the money comes from, how you put money into companies, how you financially support companies. And we had this sort of realization that those 3 worlds hardly overlaps at all. And if you can imagine taking a really smart postdoctoral scientist from Imperial College and transporting a couple of miles to the City of London, getting them to sit down with a financial expert, they barely speak the same language and certainly don't use the same words at all. So our model was to try and bring in expertise from those 3 different worlds. So typically we'd have a sort of triumvirate of people running a company, which would be a really good scientist, a really good commercial person, and somebody with knowledge of finance. And the idea was to float the companies as well, so that kind of had the aspect of the finance. But also important, the individual within the company had to have knowledge and understanding of those 3 worlds as well. And you wouldn't expect a scientist to be an expert on finance, but at least to be able to understand some of the financial drivers. We'd have a commercial executive in who would understand how you go about raising money as well as understanding the science and so on and so forth. So trying to overlap those 3 worlds. And looking back from 10, 15 years ago, that strikes me as a very sort of powerful model. And I guess the only thing I would add to that is the idea of kind of understanding the framework with which those companies exist, which might become the regulatory or the governmental or the legal aspects of it. But bringing in those sort of different worlds together, and you can imagine kind of sort of Venn diagram where those sort of 3 different worlds interact, that's very much kind of the sweet spot for having good, effective companies.
Yeah, and I guess it's not that they necessarily have to understand what the others do, but at least respect.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And be able to talk the language, so have that interaction.
Okay, right. So before I come to Alan, we've got 4 minutes left. You don't get drinks unless I get a second question from the audience. Yeah. And you'll get one for 2. Alan.
Given the start you had, Mike, I'd just like to ask the panel if they agree with Frank Zappa, who said that the brain is like a parachute, or the mind is like a parachute. It only works when it's open.
Yes. Who can argue with Frank Zappa? Right? Yeah.
I can't disagree with that. I'm trying to think of some other appropriate Frank Zappa quotes, but it's going back a few years, I'm afraid. So
that would also be appropriate.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, because
I've got a very controversial one here. So Tim Minchin quote, open your brain too much, your mind falls out. And you need both, right? So how do you find the balance between out there thinking and realism?
So don't be afraid to get it wrong. Right? I'm not a huge fan of Mark Zuckerberg, but move fast.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, so kind of Facebook talks about move fast and break things. I think there's a lot of things they probably don't do that well or communicate particularly well, but that approach, just iterate, right? It's okay to get it wrong. One of the things that was a surprise to me was the timescales involved in life sciences, because I knew it took a long time to get a molecule into a human, but it's bonkers compared to tech, right? Where you can write some code in an afternoon and ship it that evening. This is just years of work, right? We shouldn't be afraid to just cycle things a little bit quicker if the risk is minimal. Not necessarily in vivo, but in some of the kind of cell-based assays and things, trying to cycle faster, rather than just assuming it's going to take a while. So if it's 15 years end to end, what's another week? Just get that week shortened to a day if we can. So,
yeah, I guess the counter is, though, that, obviously in software you can do it really, really quickly.
Yeah.
But the thing is actually your competitor can also bring in a new technology that's going to usurp yours much more quickly as well. So it's there is I guess a different kind of mindset. But what you're talking about is almost around how innovation right, is structured. And I'm thinking that's sowing the seeds for the closing panel for next year.
Okay. Yeah.
Can I build on that? I think sort of two things to think about in terms of actually your portfolio, in terms of like when you think about different products as well, as you have a range that you're working on. So some, you know, a proportion that's kind of out there and a proportion that's more near term, and there's a really high probability and likelihood that you're going to get it right and you're going to get it out there. So I think it's about trying to kind of, you know, what we'll often think about is how do we automate and make much, much faster that more near-term work that we're probably going to get right, to actually free up our scientists and our experts to work on that more out there stuff and to kind of focus on that. So try and reduce the time and automate as much as you can in the nearer term work to free up time to spend on the more out there work and the more complex work. Is probably an approach that we take.
Okay, so we've got a question right at the back.
So it's really just to pick up on that point of being able to iterate. One of the things I'm constantly horrified by science is the inability to iterate as soon as you reach GMP.
As soon as you reach GMP and clinical grade material, and then you're kind of stuck with the molecule you've got. So how do you solve the problem of when you have the opportunity to iterate, you're working in models which have very poor translational predictability. And by the time you're getting information that would allow you to improve the drug product, you're no longer in a space where you have that opportunity to iterate and bring in new molecules. And does it... Do the panel have any experience that makes them think that there might be a breakthrough in that conundrum?
It's a very philosophical question, and given the fact that the drinks are going to be served, I'm going to sort of like call time on that. But I think that's definitely a good conversation in the bar, and again, it's part of the seeds for next year's panel. I mean, because this idea of sort of innovation and this idea of fail fast and whatever, that only works, okay, if the people actually took responsibility for what they were doing and are prepared to own up. There were good reasons why it failed, not because they didn't actually design their trials properly or anything like that. But I think that's something that we could talk about. So I'd really like to thank the panelists for their contribution. So there you are. Yeah, and Mark's used to getting that applause. Yeah, it's always there. And I'm now going to hand over to my good friend Tony. So there you go.
Thank you, Mike. Now,
Tony, final question. Can we skip the bye-bye? Just go straight to the...
No, I may have created a sort of an illusion that I wasn't going to hold up you go into drinks. But, I might have lost my place a bit in the speech and train of thought of things and then, come back. But no, I'm joking. I have no more to say. Thanks, everyone, for being part of today and actually for supporting One Nucleus year round. But, do come and join us for drinks.